Welcome to California in Focus. I'm David Mastio, and today we're talking about the cost of doing anything with gasoline. Joining me today is the Center Square's Kenneth Schrupp, our California reporter. Kenneth, what's going on?
Hey, David. California may soon be voting to increase the cost of everything in relating to fossil fuels, from gasoline to jet fuel to diesel, which would make the cost of goods shipped through California and airline tickets leaving or entering California or just getting around in California a lot more expensive. This all relates to something called the Low Carbon Fuel Standard Program, where the system has set a standard of trying to reduce the carbon intensity of its fuels. So current guidelines aim for, I believe, a 20% reduction in carbon intensity by 2030. These new standards would call for a 90% carbon reduction by 2045. How the system works is each kind of fuel is given a carbon intensity rating relative to what the state wants for that year in terms of emissions compared to the baseline, which is 2010. And you earn credits for fuels that are less intensive than the standard for the year, and you get carbon deficits. Again, I don't know why they don't call them carbon debits, they call them deficits. Carbon deficits for fuels that are more intense. So you need to purchase credits if you're producing things that are too intense. And if you make stuff below the intensity, then you can sell credits. And what this system does is it makes people who can produce credits very wealthy. And it's mostly consumers, though, whether through airline tickets or at the pump or even the cost of goods. Remember, about 20% of the cost of goods is the transportation of that good. So if we're having people pay a lot more for diesel, even jet fuel, right? Anything that moves your goods around is going to impact prices for everyone.
And 40% of goods come through California's ports, isn't that right?
Yes, 40% of goods imported into the U.S. come through California ports. 30% of goods leaving the country also come through California ports.
So this is a national story. This affects farmers in Iowa. This affects people buying their Christmas presents in Oklahoma City. It affects a wide variety of people.
It will make everything in the country more expensive, most likely. If this is approved 3 days after the election by a committee, 14, all but 2 of whose voting members are appointed by the governor. This is an unelected commission called the California Air Resources Board, and they're just going to vote after the election. It's unclear why they didn't want to vote before the election. You can draw your own conclusions. The price estimates for this are quite ridiculous. The California Air Resources Board came out with its own estimate about a year ago, saying the new standards would immediately add about 35 cents to the cost of gasoline per gallon, which is quite high. The real kicker, though, is what happens when you add 44 cents to the cost of jet fuel for a round-trip flight between Los Angeles and New York. That would raise the price by about $35.20, assuming they pass 100% of the cost on to the consumer. The cost of filling up a 15-gallon tank would go up by about $5.25. So for everyday Californians, you'll see a pretty big difference in all your little purchases. This is really bad, though, in combination with refinery shutdowns that could be coming. Just earlier this month, Phillips 66 announced it was closing its huge refinery complex near Los Angeles, which would lose about 8% of the state's refining capacity. California is something called an energy island, so it's not connected to the rest of the country's oil pipelines. This means that if you don't have enough refining capacity here, you just have to buy oil that's already been refined from somewhere else. It's generally cheapest to make your own oil and refine your own oil. Next is importing someone's cheap oil and refining it at home. Most expensive is having oil that's drilled somewhere else, probably shipped somewhere to be refined somewhere else, and then shipped over to you. And that kind of seems to be where we're going. And this is a problem that's bad for California because of how bad our ports are. Our ports are regularly ranked as the worst in the world. I'm not even saying the worst in the United States. The World Bank says California's ports are the worst in the world, worse than countries that you don't want to think about. So if we are, A, going to have the standard that's put into place that raises prices on gasoline, and B, our ports can't handle importing a lot more of this fuel because this one refinery shutting down, it's about 8%. Valero said it might shut down 2 more refineries. Combined with the Phillips would be about a quarter of our state's refining capacity just going down and have to be replaced by imports that we don't have the capacity for. So we would see gas prices not go up by the 35 cents or whatever it might be from CARB, but it could be much more because we're using more expensive inputs. And it also has to be imported through our Byzantine port system.
And California's gas prices are already on the high end for the United States, right?
Right. I believe we might have the most expensive gas in the nation right now. I can check AAA's website after this, but I believe that our gas is more expensive than even that of Hawaii, which is an island in the middle of the Pacific that does not produce its own oil.
And this is a problem not just for California, but for Nevada and Arizona as well.
Right. So California is an energy island, and Nevada and parts of Arizona are part of its energy island archipelago. This means that they will end up paying a lot of the price of the pump that we do. The governors of Nevada and Arizona, there's a Republican governor in Nevada, there's a Democratic governor in Arizona. They sent a bipartisan letter telling Newsom not to sign some of these new refinery regulations out of fear that it would cause fuel shortages and increase fuel prices for Arizonans and Nevadans. With the Phillips 66 shutdown, possible Valero shutdowns, it looks like that's going to happen anyway. The question is whether or not this CARB regulation is going to have a huge impact on Nevada and Arizona oil prices as well.
Kenneth, thanks for joining us today. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com.